Hello and welcome to my 2020 gaming PC tutorial. Have you ever wanted to build a gaming PC? Well, you've clicked on the right video. So we're here in Tustin, California at our wonderful sponsor Micro Center's location, where we're not only going to pick out all of our components for our build, but I'm also going to show you step by step how to actually build it. So even if you maybe built a computer before, come along with us, shall you? Shall we? Shall us? And shall we build a gaming PC? When choosing components for a build, the place I always like to start with is the processor. Now this is going to dictate a lot of my other choices for picking different components for my build. And really when it comes down to the processor, there are a couple of major choices, AMD and Intel. Now for this specific build, I'm going to be going with the Ryzen 5 3600X. So for this build, I'm going to be using the Asus TUF B450M+. Now not only is this a solid mid-range board, which is micro ATX, oh, this is micro ATX. The one I was looking for was right in front of me. The thing I like about this is that not only is it a solid mid-range board that will fit in our case, which I'll show you in a second, but on top of that, it will support our Ryzen processor. You have M2 slots. Basically, a lot of the things that you would typically look for in a motherboard, this has it. And thanks to our wonderful sponsors at Micro Center, they have a combo deal. So I get like 20 bucks off when I buy this as well as the Ryzen processor together. The next component I like to go for is the case. Now once you have your motherboard selected, which in our case is a micro ATX board, it means that you can pick what size case you want. So there are a couple of options with our specific build. We could go with a smaller micro ATX chassis. However, if this is your first time building a PC, I actually do generally recommend going with a little bit of a larger chassis. And because this is the H510, it means that we have a nice clean aesthetic. It's all white. It actually does a good job of kind of hiding your cable management, so it's a little cleaner. And you have a tempered glass panel. Not bad for 70 bucks. Now when it comes to building a gaming PC, arguably the most important component is your graphics card. This is really what powers all of your gaming performance. It is a very crucial component. Now, for this build, because we are aiming for something mid-range, I think AMD's brand new Radeon 5600 XT, which I very conveniently have right in front of me, is going to be perfect. At $280, this should be plenty for, well, literally any 1080p gaming you can think of, and even 1440p if you really want to push it. Once you have your graphics card selected and you make sure it will fit in your case, which shouldn't be a problem unless you're working with a very, very small case, the next choice to pick is your power supply. So this is where something like this PowerSpec 650 watt unit is going to be perfect. Now, it depends on your specific sort of system on what kind of wattage, and there's actually a couple of features that you should pay attention to with the power supply. So one of which is the actual size. So there are a couple of different models. So there's SFX, which is generally, again, for very small systems. It's a smaller power supply, generally a little bit more expensive. Or you can go with something like a full-size ATX supply, which is what 95% of people are probably going to want to do. Now, this is actually a really solid option at only $60. You're not only getting an 80+ bronze rating, you always want to look for 80+ on your power supply. If it's anything lower than that, you're likely getting something very low quality. And a nice little benefit with this is that it is a semi-modular supply. I'll get into a little bit of that later, but essentially it means that your cable management will be a lot cleaner because you only plug in the cables that you actually need, as opposed to stuffing a giant pile of cables in some corner of your case when you're not needing them. This is much better. The next thing to look for is RAM. Now this is an area which actually is fairly straightforward. So first of all, unless you're building a very budget system, I would recommend at least going with 16 gigs of RAM. And beyond that, if you're using an Intel processor, the speed is not incredibly important. DDR4 is pretty much all you need. But if you are opting to go with an AMD Ryzen system like we are, you do want to get something at least a little bit on the faster side of things. Not necessary, it will definitely work with lower speed memory, but if you can get something like this Trident Z Neo at 3600 megahertz, it will significantly speed up your performance. And importantly, it also has RGB. So there's that. The next thing you'll need is your storage. Now this is totally up to you. If you want to use an old school mechanical hard drive, by all means go for it. You are going to get a lot of capacity, but they're really slow, and at this point, I don't really recommend it unless you want it as a secondary drive. You really should pick up some kind of SSD for your main boot drive. Now you have a couple of options here. There's the older school SATA style, which is a bigger kind of SSD that you actually have to mount inside the case. They're generally going to be a little bit cheaper, but they are going to be slower. However, if you're building a new PC today, pretty much every motherboard should support the M2 NVMe standard. Now you'll find that over here, not only is that a much smaller SSD, but importantly it is going to be significantly faster, which is why we're going to be going with the Enland Premium SSD, the 512 gig model, which at only $67.99 is, well, really fast and really good for $67.99. So that's all you need to build the gaming PC itself. However, you're probably going to want a few extra things. So first of all, you're going to need peripherals. So I've opted to go with HyperX stuff this time around. So I have the Pulsefire Surge RGB mouse, I have the Alloy Origins keyboard, as well as the Cloud Singer headset. Generally speaking, mouse and keyboard definitely needed. And so it is time to actually build our PC. So we are here at Micro Center and we're actually taking advantage of their workspace, although realistically, all you need is a decent sized table and a very rigorous set of tools. Phillips screwdriver. That's it? That's literally it. So a big reason why I chose to go with this case is because it is so wide open on the inside. So even though the motherboard won't even fill the entire thing up, it's really easy to run cables behind the back of the motherboard, and specifically our power supply has a nice little basement to live inside. So with the PC opened up, our next step is to work with the power supply. Now this is the semi-modular supply that I was talking about earlier, and there's a good reason for that. So you see all of these extra cables it comes with? Now depending on your build, you may actually want to use some or all of these, but odds are you're probably not going to want to plug all of them in, and if we don't have to say plug in 5 hard drives, we can easily just not use that, and it will make our cable runs a lot cleaner. When you install a power supply, you need to pay attention to where the fan is. So with a case like this, we could actually theoretically put the fan up or down. However, because if you look on the bottom of our case, we have a dust filter, we should have the fan facing down. So all of this might look complicated and confusing, however, it's actually not that bad. So let me walk you through a couple of the power connectors that we're going to be using for this build. So if you look for the really big fat guy, this is the 20+4 pin. This goes into our motherboard. Every single PC build is going to need one of these, right? Next up, we have our CPU power. So this is a 4+4 pin. Most of the time you're going to want to put these together, and this also will go into the motherboard. But for some boards, you may only need the 4 pin, and that's why it breaks apart. You can see it has a little clip on it, so it only goes in one way. If you're building a gaming PC, the next connector is something you're almost certainly going to need, and that is the PCI power. Now this is a 6+2 pin. So again, depending on your graphics card, it may need 6, it may need the full 8, and in many cases, you're actually going to need multiple of these. Installing our power supply is very straightforward. So with our fan facing down, all we need to do is literally just slide it into place. If you look inside your power supply box, you should find 4 tiny little screws. Now this is all we need to use to actually mount the power supply. So if you come a little bit closer here, you can see that there are 4 different holes. So if I actually line it up correctly, there's a hole here, 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 and here. And all you need to do is just screw it in. Now one tip, this is good for PC building, but it actually applies to a lot of things, is to use a cross pattern on your screws. So don't do it super tight. And then instead of just sort of going around in a circle, now that we've got our top left end, we're next going to screw the bottom right. The reason why you use a cross pattern when you're installing power supplies or really any kind of PC component is it applies even pressure. So if you do like the left side first, the entire supply might actually be slightly misaligned. And this is actually just good general advice. If you're putting on like a car tire, you should use a cross pattern. You shouldn't just go kind of like around in a circle. Before we start building with the motherboard, let me give you a brief tour of what's going on here, because at first glance, well, there's a lot of stuff. So, number one thing to pay attention to is this. This is the CPU socket. It is slightly different between AMD and Intel, but regardless, you just drop your CPU in here, and I'll explain that in just a second. Now, to the right of that are our memory channels. So these are our DIMM slots, as the kids call them these days, the RAM DIMMs, the DIMM. So it's really straightforward. Open up the little slots, and this is where we'll be installing our memory. To the right of this is our power connector. So this is that 20+4 pin, the really big guy. That's where that gets plugged in. And if you look on top of the CPU socket, this is the 8-pin power supply. So again, from the actual power supply, you're plugging 2 things in here, the 20+4 pin and the 8-pin. That's it. This is our PCI slot. This is where you will install your graphics card. Now, you actually have a couple of other slots, and generally speaking, you can use these for things such as, if you're doing a really crazy build, multiple graphics cards, but usually you'll plug in things like, a capture card or maybe like a Wi-Fi card or something in here. The next thing to pay attention to is our M2 slot. Now, depending on the motherboard, you may have multiple of these. Sometimes they're actually on the back or like underneath some kind of cover. This one's thankfully right in the middle. And this is where you will install your M2 NVMe SSD. The one thing to pay attention to though are these little screws right here. So you'll see 2242, 2260, 2280, and 22110. Now, based on what size your SSD is, it's almost always a 2280. You'll want to plug in a screw or screw in a screw into one of these holes, and that screw will come with the motherboard. So that's the only thing that kind of gets a little confusing, because you definitely need that screw to keep it in, otherwise it falls out, and then you don't have an SSD. So the thing I want to focus on first is our processor. AMD's actually done a good job recently of shipping pretty solid coolers in the box, and especially considering that this entire setup is not particularly expensive, it actually makes a lot of sense for a semi-budget build. So you can see it's a fairly beefy heatsink. Now, one thing I will say is on the bottom of any of these coolers, AMD, Intel, whatever the case is, they will have pre-applied thermal paste. This is great. We don't have to deal with any sort of tubes or whatever. We can just drop this right on. However, don't touch this. When it comes to a processor, this is actually one of the more fragile components of the build. So generally speaking, grab it by the sides and do not, under any circumstances, touch these tiny little gold pins on the bottom. Now because this is an AMD processor, it has a lot of these pins, and if you bend any of these, it could very easily kill the CPU. So all we do is lift up the little metal retention arm. You'll see the entire socket moves back. So take our processor, there's a tiny, tiny little gold arrow, which has a corresponding little notch on the actual socket. All we do is line it up. Again, do not force it, just gently rest it down. And look at that. Our CPU is installed. Push the little arm down. Done. Simple, right? I know it can be scary, right? I may or may not have bent a pin or two on a CPU in my lifetime. However, as long as you're nice and gentle, do not push it into the slot. Let it rest. If it's lined up, it will slide down and you'll be just fine. Now, we just need to toss on our cooler, which actually should be pretty straightforward. Now, because this is an AMD board and we're using a bit of a larger cooler, we actually do need to remove these 4 screws on either side to remove these little plastic pieces. The reason I bring that up is if you actually look on the back of the motherboard, we have this little metal retention plate. This actually needs to stay here. So we're just gonna remove these guys. Don't worry about that back plate too much because it's not gonna go anywhere if it's, oh my God, that's really tight. Oh, holy. What kind of robot was having a bad day with this, man? Oh yeah, one little tip. So there actually are 2 ways that this can go on. It doesn't matter at all, except that you've got this little AMD logo. I've accidentally done it wrong where it's upside down. So just keep in mind which way you want to do it. But essentially, we have a window on our case. We have a window on our case. So this is the point where if you make bad decisions, people will judge you. This cooler is very easy to install. So all we need to do, again, try not to touch that thermal paste, is just line it up with the screw holes that we have right here. It should just rest right into place. And with that, then we'll just start screwing it in. Now, another reason why you want to make sure that you're applying even pressure is because we want to make sure that thermal paste on the actual CPU is making a nice, solid, firm attachment. So this is starting to look like a thing, right? We have a big cooler and a CPU, very important components. So you'll see there's a little cable that is attached to the fan. So this is a 4-pin header. Now there usually will be pretty close. So for example, ours is right here, a little CPU fan header. Now it's really easy to install. You'll see that there are a couple of notches here. So it means it only goes in one way. And all you need to do is just line it up and drop it right into place. Boom. We're ready to CPU. So when it comes to installing RAM, there are a couple of things to keep in mind. So because this is DDR4, you'll see that there's a little notch in the middle, and the entire thing is actually slightly curved. So that means that you're only going to be able to put it in one way. Line that notch up with the corresponding notch on the motherboard. If you try to put it down and it's not going in, you're probably doing it backwards. Now the next thing to keep in mind is which slots to use. So it's actually a little bit complicated. On Intel, it's fairly straightforward. On AMD, it depends. So you'll see here that we have 4 DIMM slots, which is the standard. So we have these 2 black, so it's 1 and 3, and then we have these 2 gray, which are 2 and 4. For AMD, you want to take advantage of these 2. In fact, actually, if you look really closely, you'll see these little asterisks beside B2 and A2. These are the preferred memory slots. Drop it in the slot, and then 3, 2, 1, push, and there is our RAM installed. Look at that, we're like halfway there. Don't worry about the other. Look, we're almost there. We're almost there. And the next one's even easier. It's our SSD. So installing this SSD is very straightforward. So you can see it's tiny. It's literally like the size of like a stick of gum. Now to install it's very straightforward, but you do need to keep in mind that we need a little bit of hardware from the motherboard box, which did I get out? Yes, I did. Okay, so it's really easy to lose this. So you see this tiny little screw and the little adapter? This is what we need to install our SSD. So for this, it does help if you have a little bit of a finer Phillips head screw just because it's really small. But essentially what we need to do is install the little, what would you call it? It's like I just call it like the nub, like the little screw guy. So because this is a 2280 SSD, the vast majority of SSDs that you will be using are 2280, we just install this finger tight. So we screw it in. There we go. And now to install the SSD, it's literally gonna take us like 3 seconds. So we line it up with the little slot. So I usually put it in with a little bit of an angle, kind of work it in to make sure it actually slides. So there we go. The next step is to take our SSD screw out and then just literally lean it down, use the little screw to screw it into place to make sure it doesn't pop out of the socket. And oh look, we installed our SSD in literally like 18 seconds. That's it. So now it is time to bring back our case, and now we have to just install the motherboard. Now, something that will very much vary between your cases is how you actually do this, and specifically which standoffs you use. So if I flip this guy over, what you'll see is there are a series of little brass standoffs. So these are painted black, sometimes they're actually gold. But you can see there's standoffs on the top. There are also some standoffs in the middle, and especially this NZXT case has a little post here. This is really nice because it'll help us line it up. There are also some standoffs on the bottom. The important thing here to know is that it's actually very straightforward to install this. The only thing we need to do before actually installing the motherboard is put in our I/O shield. Now this came with the motherboard, and essentially, once you open it up here, it just slides into the back of the case. So you'll see here that this is where your ports will surface, and you just want to make sure that this case is, or this little shield is here to make sure that, I don't know, it looks nice. So this actually is a little bit of an annoying thing because essentially you have to just kind of push it until it clicks. So I usually kind of work the corners until I see it not want to jump out of my hands. Click for me. Click for me. Hey! So now, all we need to do is put our motherboard into our case. Now again, because I'm using this NZXT case, I've got that little post in the middle. So as long as I get it kind of roughly lined up, perfect, love it. And then if we can get it on the peg here, which we can, boom, look at that. Motherboard's in place. Now we just need to screw it in with like 300 screws that are helpfully labeled in our NZXT little baggie. And this will be very close to done. Surprise, surprise, the way to do this best, and I'm sure you can't see this at all on camera, is using the cross method. So just start with one corner, get it screwed in, then go to the next corner, and kind of work your way around to make sure that, again, you're applying even pressure. And with that, we have a motherboard installed into our case. So if you flip it upside down or right side up, it doesn't all come crashing out. And we're actually getting pretty close. The next step is to install the graphics card, which we so helpfully have right behind the case. It's almost like I planned it out like that, look at that. This is our PCI connector. So this is what will attach the graphics card to the motherboard, which will go into this slot right here. And then if we look around on the back side of the card, you'll see that we have a single 8-pin power connector. So with the help of our little video light, so you can actually see what's going on, the next thing we need to do is actually install that graphics card. So you'll see right here our PCI slot. The only thing we really need to do is take a look at that, and you'll see it corresponds to these little metal connectors here. So these PCI slot covers we just need to remove based on where the motherboard and the graphics card sit. So all we need to do is just remove this little cover on the back. So not all cases actually use this, although it's becoming a more popular thing. And wow, what jacked up robot cranked the screw in, holy balls. Okay, so we'll remove this little piece. And the next step is to remove these top 2 screws, which should be pretty easy. Now when it comes to installing a graphics card, this is a very difficult process, which is going to require a lot of concentration. I'm just kidding. You just literally line it up and push it in. It's really easy. So just line up with a slot, click it, boom, done. Look at that. Now I'll use my giant screwdriver to put this little PCI cover back in place. And we're next going to jump into cable management. Oh boy, the least favorite part of any PC build. So one thing I am gonna do is, because this already has the cables sort of pre-run for the fans, I'm going to plug these in first, just because if I don't do them first, I'm burying them and I won't be able to touch them again. So one of our fans is actually perfectly sized to fit into this channel fan right here. That's actually either really good engineering or really lucky. Now, just like when we plugged in our CPU, these fans that are up top and on the back, they are notched, so they're only going to go in one way. These are 3-pin as opposed to 4-pin, but it doesn't make a difference. There's only one way to plug them in. So you see we have a little bit of extra slack. However, I'm just gonna pull that around back right now, and we will forget that that exists or deal with it later, whichever one I feel like. So I just plugged in the 20+4-pin, the really big guy, and oh, I'm so happy right now, because look at this little cable channel. All I have to do is just wrap it around here, go straight down, and that's it. Once I'm done with everything, I'll Velcro it in. This is making my life easy. So you can see right back here, I plugged in the 4+4-pin CPU power connector. Now it's a little bit of a tight fit, especially in this specific case. However, I've run the cable up on the top. Basically, just keep in mind that as with most of these connectors, there's a little notch on it, so it's only going to go in one way. Next up, we have our 8-pin PCI power connector. Now because this only needs the one, we have the extra lead. We'll just deal with that later. We'll just like cable tie it up. But again, we'll just line it up, click it into place, and that's it. Okay, so we have a few different cables coming from the case itself. So we have a USB 3.0 lead. This is annoying because it will get stuck and you can easily break it, so just be careful. We also have our audio, so this is for our front panel audio. And what I'm really excited for are front panel connectors. So these are typically separate, so what you'll see is you'll have a bunch of little tiny individual connectors which will go to things such as like the power button and the reset and the LEDs. However, in ZXT, we're kind enough to provide one all in a single little brick. So first thing is we're going to install our HD audio. So you'll see this little AAFP connector here, and there's one little pin knocked out on the top. There's a corresponding pin missing here, which means all we need to do is line it up and easily just plug it in like so. Next, we have USB 3, which is this guy right here. It's the sort of larger connector, and it's got the notch in the bottom, which corresponds here. Again, it's pretty easy to install, but just if you ever have to uninstall it, it's a pain because it likes to just get stuck. Now the next thing is the front panel connectors. Again, these are the ones that usually suck. However, because I have my little notched sort of input, I can just do this and live a happy, happy life. So with that, we have built ourselves a gaming PC. So before we do any kind of proper cable management, before we start putting the sides back on or anything, let's first connect it to a monitor and make sure it works. All right, so we have set up our computer. We've plugged in our USB peripherals from HyperX, as well as we have our headset here. We have our monitor connected. We have remembered to flip the switch on the back of the power supply, which I don't see anything. Oh, yep, we see some RGB action. That's a good sign. Okay, we have power to our peripherals, and we have a successful post. As soon as you see this, the first thing you should do, double check everything's correct. So we have our Ryzen 5 3600X, 16 gigs of RAM, it's these keyboards, mice. Let's hit F1 and make sure everything is successfully showing up. But as soon as you see it post, that is a very, very good sign. So there we go, we see our two 8 gig G-Skill DIMMs, which we'll have to change the speed of and everything later. All of our fans are showing up, 3600X. Now from here, you want to do a couple of minor things. So we do want to go ahead and actually set up DCP. So we have our 3666 megahertz memory. And beyond that, we're pretty much good to go. So we can start cable managing, get this thing all sort of buttoned up, install a copy of Windows, and you've successfully built yourself a gaming PC. Congratulations. If you found this tutorial helpful, definitely be sure to subscribe to the channel. If you're interested in any of these parts, definitely be sure to check them out at the link in the description. And again, huge, huge thank you to Micro Center for sponsoring this video and allowing us to crash their space and give you guys a hands-on tutorial, a real look at what it's like to build a PC.